Welcome to the Happy Imbecile. I was thinking of content for another video, and I thought I would continue a topic of conversation that I started in a previous video relating to introverts in the workplace, and I wanted to continue on that thought. And this video is more for, I don't want to say managers only, but those extroverts in the workplace thinking about how to interact with introverts. And I was thinking of looking at just dividing this video into two parts. First of all, how do you identify somebody that's an introvert? In the last video, we had discussed that there are different types of introverts, and we will still be discussing that in another video. However, for this video, there are different ways you can identify an introvert, and we're going to look at several ways to do that. The other topic that we're going to look at is how to treat an introvert, how to interact with an introvert in the workplace. And this is important because introverts are one of those groups that kind of get left behind. What I mean by that, because they're not out there in your face, they tend to be looked over when it comes to promotion or their achievements because they're not pushing it. At the same time, they tend to be shunned or ostracized. That's the word I was looking for. Ostracized, because introverts tend to come into work, do their job, have lunch by themselves, finish the day, and leave. It doesn't mean they're bad workers, but it goes against the whole ideology of team building, which a lot of companies try to push as being beneficial for the company, and beneficial, when they say beneficial for the company, beneficial for the team, for everybody. But that does not take into account that the team, the group of people, have different personality types. So what is good for one type of person may not be necessarily good for the other type of person. So how do you identify somebody who's introverted? Well, like I said earlier, their work habits. Are they the type of person that they really like to be left alone? They work well. However, they tend to avoid doing group activities. They prefer to work by themselves. The other thing that you might notice is they prefer to chat or write emails than to have a face to face conversation, or to go on Zoom or on Teams. During team meetings, they're usually the quiet ones. They're not going to really say a lot. And it's something important to note when you're thinking about this, when you're identifying this trait. It's not because they have nothing to say. Trust me, they have a lot to say. There's a lot going on in that head. However, introverts tend to ponder on those thoughts before speaking. They really like to think things through. Another interesting trait about introverts is the constant need to verify. It may seem distrustful, however, is that necessity. It goes back to thinking things through, that necessity to make sure that the information that's being disseminated, or a certain process, the way it's supposed to be done, that they have it exactly right. Not just the process, so do A, do B, do C, do D, but also the reasoning behind it, so that if they're stuck, they know how to move forward because they understand the principle behind it, so they do not have to go back and ask you again. So if you see that trait, that constant need to verify, don't get me wrong, there are some people who are distrustful and who are not sure of themselves. However, this trait, in combination with the other traits that we mentioned before, you could be truly just identifying somebody who's an introvert. Because they need to think things through, they could be very slow at responding, or if they're in a position where they need to make decisions, they may not make a decision right away. This reminds me of a story. as a supervisor in a call center. We had two offices. Each office was about 2 hours apart in two different cities. In one office, all the supervisors there, save one, you're looking at them, they were extroverts, and you had one introvert on that team. Whereas the office in the other city, it was the complete opposite. It was mostly introverted supervisors and one extroverted supervisor. And I remember we went on a team building exercise with both teams, and something interesting happened. There was, I can't remember if it was psychiatrist, psychologist. It was a doctor of some sort. And he made a supposition, which we found was very interesting. And it was really food for thought. He said, let me guess, your team meetings often go like this. This group, the one in the big city, often throws out ideas. By the end of the meeting, they've made a decision. And at the end, you don't hear anything from the other city because they just, at the end of the meeting, agree with the decision. And we all looked around. We're like, yeah, that's pretty much how the meetings go. Then he asked that other city, that other group, did they always agree with the decisions that were being made? And for the most part, they nodded no. Sorry, nodded. Can you nod no? I don't think so. They shook their heads in saying no. So he explained, well, it's because the introverted group needs time to think before making a decision. So the lesson that we learned from that exercise was that in the future, and that's what happened after that team building exercise, in the future, all meetings, we would make sure that no decision would be made on a topic that was brought up at that meeting on that day. It would be tabled, and then the following week, we would discuss it again. Everybody would have their input, and then a decision would be made. So that I bring up that story because it kind of highlights the thought process of an introvert. They need to take a moment to think it through. Whether it's a few minutes, sometimes they'll tell you, I'll circle back to you next week. It's not just because they're trying, it's not because they're trying to delay. They honestly want to spend some time to give it some thought. Maybe even do some research or talk to other people, get some input if they're in a position of leadership. They want to make an informed choice. So that's definitely another trait right there. Two other traits is they tend not to like chit chat. The small talk, and we mentioned this in the last video. Conversations to introverts is something very important, and it must be meaningful. Just because somebody's an introvert doesn't mean that they don't like to talk. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they're shy. It's just that interactions have a different meaning for them, and they prefer deep, meaningful conversations, deep, meaningful interactions, as opposed to how's the weather type of conversation. And the final trait, I think I probably might have mentioned it earlier. It's important for them they prefer to work by themselves. They do not like group activities. I think that was the whole point of the last video, talking about group activities. It truly drains them, which is why they don't like doing it. They're not energized by it like some other people might be energized by that kind of activity. So those are just a few traits. There's definitely many more, but I feel those are the obvious ones. My apologies. There was somebody at the door, so actually it was Amazon delivery, so I had to stop the video, run down, go and get it. So if it seems out of breath, that is why. And if I did not continue from where I left off, it's because I really don't remember the last thing I said before going down to pick up the package. Anyways, I believe I was just finishing off the first part of our discussion talking about the ways to identify an introvert. Most of these are common traits, not necessarily all encompassing, but definitely traits that you can find amongst many introverts. Anyway, so that is the first part of the video. The second part, I wanted to ask, once you've identified an introvert either as a manager or a coworker, how do you interact with them? How do you make them feel comfortable? If we're trying to create an all-inclusive work environment, what do you do? Well, the first one I want to mention, and I think this is a very important one because many people miss this, is don't try to change them. There's often the expression that you need to get out of your shell. Well, no, they don't. Are there different elements of their trait that they can change? Of course, just like an extrovert has some elements of their personalities that they can change as well. However, on the whole, this is who they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just because you may not understand it or you may not be able to relate to it doesn't make it bad. And that's the whole point about being inclusive. There's a lot of different types of personalities that we may not understand in the workplace that we accept. This is just another one. If you're a manager or in a leadership role and you have introverts on your team, another thing you can do is allow them the space to work independently if that is possible. And if the work environment has the opportunity to allow them to work remotely, or if they have to come in to have a closed off section, that would greatly benefit them. I know many offices have this open concept, but let's be honest, the open concept caters to extroverts. Somebody who does not want to be disturbed, that just wants to do their work. The open concept can be very jarring and counterproductive to their ability to be efficient and to perform well. And so that brings me to the next point, is to respect the silence. If you have created a quiet environment for them to work in, don't disturb it. Don't disturb it unless you have to. Obviously, there is a level of interactions that needs to be done in the workplace, but do not disturb it trivially for chit chat, for example. Let them enjoy to work in peace. Now, when introverts do speak, this I can't stress enough. When introverts do decide to speak, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting, as hard as it may be for you to do, and I know for many, this is very, very, very difficult for them to do, is do not interrupt them. Remember what I said earlier, is that a lot of times they need to think things through before they speak. So imagine they've done all this effort to think about a line of reasoning or a line of thought to express that thought, which means a lot to them. Just as they probably did not interrupt you because what you said to them was important for them to hear. And now they're trying to respond to you either one-on-one or in a group setting to express a thought, and then boom, you interrupt them. You don't let them finish their thought. That has so many, depending on the type of introvert that you're encountering, it will have one of many effects or all of them. From completely shutting down and never expressing themselves again, to confusing them because now they lost their train of thought and what they were trying to say, or just viewing you as just disrespectful and you really do not care about what they have to say, and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. And so, as much as it is possible, don't interrupt them. Trust me, they'll give you a chance to speak and they will listen to what you have to say without interrupting you. And quite frankly, when you think about it, it's just part of general listening skills because it just made me think, okay, well, somebody might actually not interrupt, but are you actively listening? And most introverts can tell right away if you are actively listening to what they said or you are just controlling yourself just so that you can express your point. And by what you express and the way you express it, it's very obvious to see if you are actually listening or you just said something because what you say next might have already been answered or addressed by what the person was saying. So it's very important to really not just not interrupt, but to actively listen. And active listening is something we should do with everybody, not just introverts. It's I don't want to say it's communication etiquette. It's just me the best way to have real communication between two people. Another thing that can be done when you're interacting with introverts, especially if you're in a leadership position, when there are team meetings, an agenda would be nice. You can send it to the whole group, but if you want, you can also be specific and let the introvert know these are the topics that we're going to discuss. And the reason why, remember what we said about thinking things through, it will give them time to think about the topic and therefore be able to participate because you want them to participate. That's the whole point of a team meeting, to participate in the meeting with some meaningful thought, their own perspective, letting them know in advance and don't put them on the spot, especially not in front of other people. It's not a question of shyness. There's a big difference between being shy and being introverted. It's not the same thing. It's just for many introverts, they find it very offensive to just be put on the spot and they're not able to express themselves the way they would like to because they didn't even have the time to reflect upon what they wanted to say. When you respond to introverts, be very thorough, as thorough as you can. However, in an effort to be thorough, and I know this may sound complicated and heavy, but avoid all the fluff. And I think that's going to depend on the type of introvert because I know I'll speak for myself. When you're explaining something to me, I don't like a lot of fluff. Sometimes the backstory helps because it helps me understand the principle behind the steps and the procedures. However, there's a lot of fluff that I'll give you an example. Have you ever gone on YouTube and there's a question you're asking, like, what are the top 5 winter boots? Actually, better example. You're going to cook a recipe. You kind of have an idea of how to make it, but you need to know the ingredients and exactly the process to make that recipe. So you go online, you look for the video, and you click on the first video, and the first 5 minutes of the video is the person giving the backstory, where they learned the recipe and what country it came from and who the neighbor was that introduced it to them and blah, 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 blah. It is so annoying. I know for me personally, it drives me absolutely insane because I came there for one reason, is to get that recipe. For me, a better video would be start off with what I came there for and then end with the fluff, the blah, blah, blah. And I might actually listen to that now that I've gotten what I wanted. And it's the same thing with giving instructions or responding to an introvert and being thorough. So, being thorough, meaning provide the information that they need minus the extra fluff that is really not necessary. Sometimes people will describe a process and then they'll think of another process that's similar to that process and they're explaining why we're not doing this and how this process is this and the other, that other process. The question that the introvert is asking themselves at that point is, do I need to notice to be able to do this job? If I don't, then it's unnecessary. So keep it moving. Be tactful when counseling or correcting or giving feedback, I guess is the best expression. Different people give feedback in different ways. And I do know many people just say, well, that's the way that I am. I'm blunt and I'm to the point. And that's fine. However, is it getting the desired results? This is something that's very important to me and that I like to speak to very often. We all have different ways that we try to do things. However, when we're doing something, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times we have a desired result at the end of it. This is the outcome that I'm looking for when I'm doing this action. So the way you say something or how you say something and the words that you use, is it getting the desired result? If not, then you're doing it wrong. That's my opinion, but I honestly believe this is one of those few instances as a happy imbecile that I am right. If you did it in the right way, the desired result would come 90% of the time, because there's some people that are just stubborn. But for the most part, if you're trying to motivate somebody to do something, you're trying to help them in a certain way, the idea is to do it in a way to get the best results or to get the closest results to what you are expecting. And this is where tact comes in. It's something, again, just like active listening, being tactful is something that everybody can work on and improve on, and it helps with communication. The last thing that I want to mention, it reverts back to what we were saying earlier about face-to-face interactions and whatnot. If you can, with any measure possible, instead of meeting them face-to-face, instead of a Zoom call, ask yourself, could it be sent by email? Could it be sent by chat? They would much more appreciate that over the face-to-face. So those are just some thoughts on identifying and interacting with introverts in the workplace. I'm sure if you go online, there's many more suggestions and ideas. Most likely, you know an introvert, you work with one, and they've been a mystery to you. But at the end of the day, like everybody else, they're human. Just like everybody in the workplace needs to have a place that they can feel comfortable to produce the work that they're being paid to do in a comfortable environment that they can enjoy, that's not toxic. These are just some thoughts to help you, the viewer, who's in a work environment, working and interacting with introverts, have an environment that you both enjoy once you understand each other. So hopefully you liked the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Take care.